Welcome back to Ready Nerd Go. This is Graphic Policy's tabletop RPG podcast where someone who knows nothing or very little about tabletop RPGs, me, hangs out with someone who does know a lot about tabletop RPGs, Enko, and I get to pick his brain and we all get to learn stuff together. How you doing, Enko?
Oh, pretty good. It's a beautiful morning so far. You?
I, yeah, no, not too bad. It's funny. I was expecting it to be terrible weather today, and it's not.
Right.
Exactly. Now, depending on when this comes out, that's going to be absolutely irrelevant for folks. So,
Yeah, they can try to guess when we're recording these.
right? Like, and the thing is depending on where you are, like this date could easily be very spring-like or very throes of winter. So
Hmm.
we'll leave it to you. Last episode, we spoke a little bit about what to do if you've created a character that you don't like or you realize you don't like. And Anko and I both gave examples of characters that we had where we realized that hey, I'm not really enjoying this guy. Maybe I'll change him about. And ironically enough, in the game we then played after we recorded that episode, I started following that advice that Anko provided. I started changing the character up as we were leveling up, and I realized that the Alien game system is remarkably flexible in that I can adjust things very subtly to make it a bit more enjoyable. And the more you get into the characters, the more you realize that, this motivation isn't really where this guy's coming from. I'm going to change it, run it by the GM, who's not going to care as long as we're all having fun. It doesn't really change things that much. And
Hmm.
now that that specific module is over, it's almost an ideal time to change that sort of thing. Today, unless you have a thought on that.
No, I was just thinking it's kind of fun 'cause in a similar vein, like specifically with the way the alien system works, it has like a friend and rival mechanic to it, or where one of the other players' characters is your friend and another one is your rival. And with the way that my character's story was going, it was very much looking like his friend and rival were pretty much going to be swapped around just because the way the story went. And then, like, at the very last second, something happened completely due to the roll of the dice that entirely altered the direction my character was going in. And it was not something I was intending or expecting, but it's made me enjoy the character more. So sometimes your enjoyment of the character can change and get better entirely just based on random things that will happen in the game itself.
Well, yeah, and that's actually something we didn't really bring up last episode, which is a very good point. Just because you're not enjoying the character in the moment doesn't mean that something won't change, either of your own volition, but more specifically in this case, something happens in the game that you could never have planned for, and you realize that to react in character would mean that you have to change this ever so slightly. And now all of a sudden, you went from having a specific rival to that rival now becoming your friend, and now you hate my character because he keeps picking at your rival.
It is a weird but fun system.
It really is. So in in words, in that vein, I'm not cutting that. In that vein, what happens when, as a group, you're playing a game, and then eventually it comes to light that there not a single one of you actually are enjoying that? I'm going to assume you have examples because you've been playing for a while, and I'm sure you've got at least one point where you're a couple sessions deep. You're like, guys, this is kind of shit.
Yeah, no, that is that the times that I've seen that really come through are generally when the GM will have some like fairly high concept idea they want to try at the table, like a very like specific like narrative arc that, like, hey, do you guys want to like try doing something like this? I think it'd be really cool. Like uh all of your characters have no memory, or we all get like time portaled to like modern day with our D&D characters, or something like high level like that. And people are like, you know what, yeah, sure, we'll give that a shot. And then a couple sessions in, everybody's just kind of like, you know what, this is absolutely terrible. We're not enjoying this at all.
There's
And
actually a comic where that happens called Berserker, and it's very clearly, in terms of what you just said, like a D&D character gets transported to the modern world, and what happens there. It was actually really well done, but I think the difference there is it's one guy telling the story, so he knows what to do, and as opposed to trying to play it in a game setting where you're trying to find ways for these characters to have fun, right? Like you're all
yeah.
D&D characters, whereas this guy could control modern day characters. Anyway, this isn't a show where we talk about that kind of stuff, but at some point, I'm sure we'll have recommendations for things to read, movies to watch down the road.
Oh, definitely.
Because hey, why not? It's something that we always think about. So
And just in general, like I can't remember, it was last episode or the episode before, we talked about, it's like indulging in different types of media makes your game better. So yeah, recommendations is totally something I could see us doing. But yeah, so when the entire table thinks the game is bad, honestly, the biggest hurdle to get around is getting everyone to admit that they're not enjoying the game. Because I've definitely
because
had
I'm
games where we've gone like 4 sessions in, like, hey, is anybody actually having fun here? No, I haven't enjoyed this since the beginning. Has anybody enjoyed this?
and I can imagine now. Again, like I know I say our group, but at the time your group would have
Mm,
is somewhat unique in that, or to me it would be somewhat unique in that it's a group of folks who play games together as opposed to a group of folks playing a specific game together. So there is more flexibility to bounce around through settings.
yeah.
And so I can imagine that because of that, you would have been like, ah, this game sucks. I'm not going to say anything because I think the other guys are enjoying it. And every single one of you is having a variation on that thought of, this
Hmm.
sucks, but I'm not going to say anything because I'm pretty sure Enko is really enjoying this. He looks like he's into it, and what you're actually sitting there thinking is, if I can make pizza tonight, and then I've got leftovers for.
Exactly. And generally, it's the GM that tends to notice stuff like that first, just because in your role as a GM, it's functionally your job to be paying attention to how the players are enjoying the game and making sure that everybody's enjoying themselves. So the GMs tend to be the ones to recognize when this is happening first. Not always, but generally. And I kind of like to give the advice that you do with most new media and stuff you're trying out. It's like, hey, like, give it a couple of sessions, give it a couple of episodes, give it a couple of chapters. Then, if you don't like it, we'll see what we can do. Because there's definitely, I've had some of my favorite campaigns have started off very poorly just because nobody was really in their groove yet. Nobody really figured out their characters yet. The GM wasn't quite hitting their stride yet. Whatever reason, but a couple of sessions in, things start clicking and, you know, things work out. So I'd say, don't like half hour into session 1 go, this is terrible, I quit.
No, and I think that goes back to even what we had touched on with the characters. Like, give it time to breathe. Make sure you understand that you're either not enjoying the game. There's something that you could that's just off a little bit about the game.
Yeah.
When everyone thinks it's bad and everyone comes to the same realization, I'm going to presume that there's no real official way to do it. It's just is anyone having fun? Should we play something else? Or if is it a case of do you have the discussion? I'm enjoying this setting, but something about what we're doing isn't fun. We should talk about and then you chat about what's not fun about it.
I mean, I wish most of the times that's happened, the discussion has started that healthily, but generally it's one person gets absolutely fed up and starts complaining about it, and then everybody else realizes that, oh wait, yeah, no, none of us are enjoying it.
it's a case of um, I know we've touched on the social contract before, and I know that we've touched on a lot of the, not a lot, but some of the folks that play tabletop RPG games are or can be a little bit less inclined to have that kind of conversation frankly and openly,
Yeah.
like the example we just gave. So I suppose in some ways it's a case of you know that you're not enjoying it, but you're not really sure if anyone else is. And so at that point, how do you bring it up? And then all of a sudden, person B is over there complaining about this is stupid, this is so dumb, and you're like, oh, thank God I don't like it. But now I can't. I don't want to be the person who's just bitching about it for the sake of bitching about it. So do I try and defend it? Like I can
Well,
imagine it would be an awkward position if you're not hating the game.
and I mean, generally I've been in the situation, and I'm not gonna pretend I've never been the one that started bitching. I am not a perfect person by any means. I've definitely had once or twice where it's just like, hey, you know what? I'm hating absolutely everything about this. I've tried, guys. I can't. But generally, when I haven't been the one that started, which has been, it's happened rarely, but it has happened. But generally, when I'm not the one that's started it, it's just kind of like, okay, they're complaining about it. Then it's like, okay, I'm also not having fun. I can kind of grab on to their complaints and steer the conversation towards, hey, is everybody at the group actually enjoying this, and what can we do to make the group as a whole enjoy this better?
And I think that does go to back, like we said, it goes back to having the conversation in a productive way as opposed to bitching and moaning.
Yeah, yeah, because it's like
Which
it can be very cathartic to bitch and moan on occasion, but
100. So I've with the risk of this falling too far down a specific rabbit hole, anger and hatred can be very cathartic to let out, and
yep.
when you start releasing that, regardless of what it's at, it can be too easy to fall down the rabbit hole of staying in that lane. And I think that for a lot of people, if you're not necessarily aware of that, it can be difficult to recognize it and to pull back. So
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, it's very cathartic and it's very relieving to be angry and to let it out, like, you know, at a inanimate object as opposed to a person, which again has more of a rabbit hole than I think I want to touch on.
Yeah,
That
I mean, it,
but
it it's a fun topic, but not really appropriate for here.
exactly, and I think that so at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, is if you're not enjoying it, the best thing to do, from what I understand, is talk to the DM or the GM. Say, hey, you know what? This isn't really my thing. I'm not super into it. I think maybe I might step back for for a bit just to let you guys play if you're all enjoying it,
Yeah.
and then even have the GM do a check in after a couple of sessions. So how's everyone doing? Are you all enjoying it? Be honest now, and don't tell me now, but tell me after the session where you're not gonna, you know, run the risk of being influenced by someone else's decision. Let me know, and if you're not enjoying it, we'll come back. We'll chat about what's not being enjoyed and go from there.
Yeah. Generally, when I am GMing, I tend to do something along those lines. I don't. I used to say pretty much that verbatim, but then we very quickly run into the problem of actively soliciting people directly for advice tends to make them give the
What they think you want
bland
to hear.
generic response. It's the same as like when you're an artist and you're working on something. It's like, hey, what do you think of this? And they go, oh, that's good. It's like, okay, that tells me absolutely nothing
Yeah,
useful, but
I
thank you, I
I
guess.
I, I appreciate the fact you like it, but that I'm actively asking for what you think could be improved about it, and because I'm asking, that means I'm not going to be offended when you tell me what can be improved about it.
Exactly. So generally, what I tend to do as the GM now is, it's actively listening tends to be the best way to gauge how people are feeling with the game. Like obviously this depends on the group, but you don't always need to like proactively ask them like, hey, what did you think about this? What do you think about this? Just once the game is done and everybody's putting their stuff away, just pay attention to what people are talking about and what people are and how people are acting. Because like
Because if they're still talking about what they've just played, they're enjoying it to some extent. If the
yeah,
topic is immediately, so what do you want to do now? They're not talking about it, then there's no real excitement there.
yeah, and if people are looking like tense or exhausted or grumpy or that kind of stuff, then generally a pretty good indication that they weren't really enjoying themselves. But if they've got smiles on their faces and they're chatting with other people and they're going, "Oh man, that part was so cool," then you don't really need to pester them with, "Well, did you actually enjoy it?" Because like you can just pay attention to what people are saying without
I
having to drag it out of them.
I hate to say it's common sense because that's
Oh,
a
I hate that term.
phrase that again that's also become a loaded phrase these days. But ultimately, when it comes down to that kind of thing, it can very easily be somewhat common sense in terms of, is Anchor having a shit day, or is he actively now, or is he just not enjoying this game? And that obviously as a GM takes some experience.
Hmm.
Now, once you've all agreed that the game isn't what you thought it would be, I do say that word accidentally sometimes as well.
Mm.
Um, what do you do if you don't like the game as a group? What happens once you started that conversation of this sucks?
Well, there's generally there's the broad categories of you can either retool the game, so you guys keep playing with your characters and the system, but you either kind of rework the premise and things just go off in a radically different direction in the next session, or you guys kind of do a soft reboot and go, okay, we don't really like that it's going in this direction. We'd prefer doing something like this, and okay, we'll just reboot back to that point, and people can go off from there. But if you're not having like, if you don't think the game is salvageable, then you need to start digging into like, okay, what is it about the game specifically that people aren't really enjoying? Like, is it their characters that they're not enjoying? Is it the general overarching plot that they're not enjoying? Is it the tone? It could be that they don't like specific mechanics of the rule system that you're using. It could just be that they're not really enjoying the GM's style of GMing, in which case, either somebody else from the group is going to have to pick up the GMing role, or the group is just going to have to disband. And sometimes that just is the end result, is, hey, this group is not a good group together. Things end sometimes.
And I'm sure that happens more often than not. It's not there's no fault with anyone, but if, for example, I'm GMing a game, I don't GM, folks, in case you have not picked this up yet. I have not GM'd and have played only a handful of games. Assuming I'm GMing a game and my style is more to act out a lot of stuff and provide a lot of context clues through dialogue as opposed to outright spelling it out. And the players would rather it be spelled out so they can take notes if they're not fully grasping all of the dialogue choices, because maybe Anko's character is having a chat and Joe's character is over in the corner doing nothing. So he's not really paying attention because he's trying to work out what's going on with Simon.
Mm,
And Joe and Simon are trying to figure out, well, if we do this, and quietly in the corner, not paying attention to the context clues, well, they're obviously not going to have any idea where the direction's going to go, especially if it's not clear that that's my side of GMing.
yeah.
So I can see if that's what you enjoy as a GM, not having to spell it out can be really difficult to play with people who need it spelled out a bit more.
And like one of the biggest divisions that comes up a lot in tabletop RPG styles is how much like combat versus like social stuff happens, because like our group, just because of the general makeup of our group, time constraints and everything else, our group tends to run like really combat heavy games, just because we have limited time to play. The people there are more interested in like the gritty tactical, power fantasy than like political intrigue or anything. So the sessions where we're just role playing tend to be very few and far in between. Most of our sessions tend to be predominantly dominated by combat and like the mechanics and winning and losing in all of that area. But if you're somebody who doesn't really enjoy combat and you just want to smooze with the political elite and try to, do the backstabbing, backroom deals and kind of stuff, there are definitely RPGs that and like games that you can play and do that in, but that's a very different play style than the people who just want to go to the dungeon, kick the doors down, and kill the monsters and take their loot.
And that could very easily be a case of, hey, I don't think that what I want out of this game and what you want out of this game are the same thing. This is a
Yeah,
good time for us to part ways.
yeah,
And
and it's
no hard
not.
feelings about that for the most part.
Yeah, and it's not as big of a deal if it's like one of the players and the rest of the players that have clashing styles, because then it's just okay, sorry guys, this isn't the game for me. See you later. When the GM has a clashing style with the players, that tends to be a group ender more often than not, just because of the necessity of the fact that people who are willing to GM are relatively rare, and if the GM no longer wants to run for that group, then that group isn't playing anymore until they can find a GM who is willing to run for them.
And until they find a GM or one of the group want to step up, which we've talked about before, may not always be as a
Yeah.
viable option as you would think. I don't think I had another question on that because I think that's an exhaustive answer.
Doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't now. Often that's because it's one of those. I'm not saying that you having an exhaustive answer isn't a thing. It's just it caught me off guard, and I was like, huh. I usually have stuff ready to go, but that you've answered the question that I had following up without knowing it.
I mean,
So no, carry on.
one thing we can kind of fall back to and follow up on is if I mentioned those are like in the fiction and like play style stuff, but one of the things that it's come up in our group a few times, and I know it has come up in other groups, is when the game that you're playing mechanically isn't enjoyable for the players. Because like I know when we were playing The Witcher, one of the players in there, he loves that style of game. He loves the world. He loves those type of characters. It's got the crunchy tactical combat he enjoys, but the actual mechanics of that rule system, he could not get behind, and he just did not enjoy it. So he stepped away from the table until we were done playing The Witcher, and that had nothing to do with the play style of the game, because we've been playing together for years. It was just that game system wasn't working for him. And when that happens, especially at a group level where we're trying a new system and everybody's going, you know what, this just is not working for us, that generally means that, okay, this campaign and these characters are getting scrapped and we're just, too bad, that's disappointing, we're going to go try something new.
Uh, uh,
But you can kind of salvage it if you just port like the story and the characters like whole scale into a new system, which doesn't work very often. I have made it work successfully at least once, but generally speaking, if it's the rule system itself that the players just aren't jiving with, that probably means that specific campaign is toast.
I was going to ask before you elaborated after the Witcher thing.
Mm,
I'm going to assume that just taking the characters, say, for example, the Witcher characters. Obviously, you can't take a Witcher from The Witcher into Forgotten Realms or whatever.
Hmm.
However, you could make some kind of marginal conversion from a Witcher to, say, a Dark Elf or something where they're a bit more combat. They have a bit more combat ability than the average human.
Yep.
So there would be some level of transferability, but not everything is going to be the same. Like you're going to have to change. Your witches or your dark elf has not gone through some kind of trial of the grasses, but there are other trials that they could have gone through that you can just adjust slightly. I assume that you've had to do that numerous times where like you said, you adjust the characters, move from one to another, but in some cases, like you said, it just doesn't. It's just not viable.
And I know I don't know how I don't think it's super common my entertainment in doing this, but I like to collect a lot of different types of systems and like just see what's available out there. And one of the things that I always do when I get a new system is I have one character who was from our a Pathfinder campaign in our it was the Hell's Rebels adventure path, absolute favorite. But that was mostly our GM just made it really come alive too. And I absolutely loved the character I played in that. And one of the things I do whenever, especially when I get a new like fantasy system, is I'll try to recreate that character in that system because you can never get a one-to-one of who this character was, but trying to figure out, okay, how would I express the concept of this character with the mechanical options that the system presents me is a really, for me, fun way to kind of understand the like bounds and limitations of the system that I'm currently messing around with. Like, okay, in the Hell's Rebels game, this character just like he freely generated fire. There's not a lot of systems that have even in fantasy. There's not a lot of systems that just let your character spontaneously generate fire without limit. So it's like, how can I translate that concept into this setting, in this world, in this system? And it can be a very interesting way to poke at the limits and ideas of what they're trying to express.
I have so many questions on that, and that's going to be episode 6
Sounds good.
because that's a topic that I think is different. So similar vein, and I do enjoy how we have gone from the first 2 episodes having a plan to the next 3 have been built entirely off what we've discussed.
Hmm.
It's almost like we're telling a story together. Who would have thought?
With a vague structure of rules in place.
Exactly. Now, at some point, as we've said, we're going to touch on recommendations for different media because it it's going to come to that. Now, once we've gotten to and gone through a lot of the mechanics of the game and again the social contract and what to do in certain situations as as a player, at some point we're going to start to delve into what we enjoy, how we bring that to the table. In that vein, if you're in an unenjoyable game, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but these are just the 3 things I was wondering about.
Hmm.
How do you turn the unenjoyable game into an enjoyable game? You said that doing a soft reboot is, it is an option. If someone isn't familiar with that concept, how would you explain it?
All right. So generally speaking, the way the easiest way to explain it is if you played video games before, especially ones that have like branching plot point paths. A lot of people tend to have multiple saves at those different plot points of like, oh, I can go down route A or route B. I can trust this guy or I can stab him in the back. I'm gonna make a save file right before I make this decision, and then go explore that. And then if I don't like it, I'll reboot back to that save file, and then I can choose option B instead of option A. And that's functionally what a soft reset is. Is you're just kind of going, okay, we're just going to like rewind time a bit on like the player level, we're just going to say, okay, that last X number of hours of story development didn't happen. Instead, we're going to go off in this direction.
I
And
can
then,
imagine that would be both really cathartic to, look, we've all wanted to, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that. I wish I could take that back. And you can apologize for some things once said are said. I can imagine it'd be really cathartic to, you know what? We're going to wind back that the last week, 2 weeks of sessions because this just hasn't been working out. And the more we go under it, the less all of us are having fun. Let's go back to this point. You can ignore everything else, or maybe even you can, all of your characters can have vague recollections as to what happened. And so now that's why you're trying to avoid going down the same path, because if you're telling the story, then it stands to reason your characters would do the same thing again. Obviously, you're a player controlling it, so you have a bit more of a say in that. But you understand what I'm getting
yep.
at.
And it's something you like. I've only seen it and have it done a handful of times across my, oh sweet God, nearly 2 decades of play now. But it's something that you don't do super often, because it goes back to what we were discussing earlier about maintaining the illusion of choice, where if you're constantly resetting and rebooting, then the players will stop caring about the decisions they make, because if it doesn't matter, you can always just undo it and roll back. Then you stop caring about the decisions that you make, because it's just, yeah, we can just roll it back.
So it's almost as if, I don't know if you ever played the game Prince of Persia, where you have the
Yes.
sands of time that you can rewind. I think it's like 10 to 20 seconds of gameplay that you've just done. You can rewind that to any point within there. So the theory being, if you jump off a cliff and realize, oh, I shouldn't have jumped off that cliff, you rewind it, you lose I think it's like a one of four chances you get until you can reload it, and then you don't jump off the cliff.
Yeah, and like generally that type of like it's with that type of reset, they tend, at least in my experience, to be very like short rollbacks, where
Yeah.
either a player or the GM will introduce a change to the fiction, like oh, this character does like something horrific, or this other character, this NPC that you guys all cared about, has had a gruesome death. And the play would generally stop and be hey, I'm not fond of this, like I'm genuinely not cool with this. And then a little bit of discussion is like, okay, we're gonna, okay, you know what, that's fine, that makes sense, sorry, we're just going to roll
Ignore that.
back a bit on that, and then do something different, because
And,
nobody liked this.
and you can always build that into the game where you get to, all right, so if you don't like this, bear with me. We're gonna change it. I'm gonna change the module for a bit. So this session we're gonna find a thing and MacGuffin it back. You're
Exactly.
still like, like you can, as a GM, you can say your character's still gonna know what happened, but we're gonna go back to before it happened so that the story isn't invalidated, because as a GM I worked hard on said story, but I recognize that what my choices were and what I thought was cool hasn't resonated with the players. So we're going to acknowledge that, but my work, but your feelings, and we're going to circle back to before that specific line happened, because as a player group or characters, you fought to save the life of that NPC, and in some ways, I feel that would be a really interesting way of doing it, but may also not work for the players if they realize that, oh wait, this is actually kind of a fun way to do it. Can we do it again? Is it going to be a one-time thing, etc.? So it's, I think, all down to how as a GM you're going to handle it, and how as players you handle the moment where, like, we're not really having fun and let's do a soft reboot. Where and how do we do that soft reboot?
Yeah, and like it's like definitely you wouldn't want to like roll back every single time the player's like, oh, I didn't like this, because sometimes as a GM it's like, hey, if you want to, give the players a really motivating hook, sometimes, yeah, you want them to have that, hey, this really shitty thing happened, you know, then the heroes now need to either quest to find a way to undo it or bring the people who did it to justice or that kind of thing. Like, you
Yeah,
definitely, that's definitely an emotional gauntlet that is a very ripe area for storytelling. You just need to be careful with it as a GM that you don't go too far with it or like accidentally, you know, do like kill. Like one of the big things that comes up is, in for most people when they start playing after a while, like when I was growing up, it was very much every adventurer was conveniently an orphan. They had no family, they had no loved ones, they were just random wandering merchants. Because every time you did have, any anybody your character cared about, the GM would either kill them or have them kidnapped or whatever because it's a potent source of drama. But you might not want to deal with that as a player. Like, you might just want, yeah, no, this character has a loving family. I don't want to, role play them like being graphically murdered or whatever. I just want my character to come from a loving family and like just
yeah.
don't
It
do horrible stuff to them.
it's and that's just like so many times you have, and I think this actually builds into what I was going to ask you. The last question I had is, how do you make the unenjoyable game enjoyable as a player? And I realize as I asked that, we've touched on that throughout the episode of changing things as you're playing, things like that. So that has already been touched on. When it going back to your not wanting to role play a specific thing, it's okay to have a character come from a happy origin. Maybe they're just really
Yeah.
nice and want to help people. Maybe maybe they have a family and their motivation is, I'm going to stop the big bad so it doesn't hurt my family.
I remember one of the characters I had, he came from, a loving village. The village throughout the entire campaign stayed intact and was never really touched on. But it was a frequent motivation for the character because, like, every time we'd reach a new settlement, he would send a letter home, and like occasionally, like people from the village would just show up in like minor roles that weren't like oh hey, here's your gotcha moment. It was just oh hey, here's a piece of your character's backstory that's
It,
just showed up to give flavor to the world.
here's someone that's just here to chat because they're on a they're trading down significantly far away that you just happen to have meandered your way through.
Exactly. It's like
And I think that that does build the world itself to so that you would have more enjoyment from it.
yeah, because then your character has reasons to care about what's currently happening. Like for me,
Mm.
I would much prefer to like threaten a character's like a character's like background character. Like, hey, even like an implied threat can be so much more useful than just outright killing them off because once they're dead, the character's dead. There's, except in high fantasy systems and like high level games, there's not really much you can do about that. But, if the character is like, oh, your beloved peasant village is fine right now, but that this bad thing might happen to them in the
Hmm.
future, then that gives the player all of the agency because then they can, make that decision of, oh, they're in danger. Like, they might be in danger. How can I prevent this from happening? Should I prevent this from happening? Do I want to handle it directly? Do I want to try to like go back home and like teach them to defend themselves and build up their defenses? Or do I want to go straight to the source of the problem and try to take care of it myself? And giving the players the agency directly as opposed to, hey, I murdered your beloved background characters. Have fun with that.
I think that ultimately what we're saying, or what you're saying in that case, is there are ways to make an unenjoyable game enjoyable, but it really comes down to how much the GM is willing to flex the story they were going to tell and how
Yeah.
much agency they're giving to the players. Look, I don't, this character has to die for the story, so that's not going to change. But if you really aren't enjoying it, we can MacGuffin it, roll back to a certain point. That person is still going to die, but otherwise the story just doesn't work. It's a conversation you can have, as the saying goes, above the table,
Yep.
which I'm fairly sure we have touched on a lot of the GM and the tabletop RPG sayings in probably the first episode, and if we haven't, then hopefully at this point people can
Yep.
pick it up. But we did touch on it because, ironically enough, at one of our last game sessions, someone said something, was like, I actually know what that means because Anko told me. So
Well, I'm glad it's sticking with you.
right, at least one person's getting something out of this show.
Excellent.
So I don't have any further questions, and the thing I really want to ask you about, I'm asking you about next week, and I've actually already started my notes for next week's episode. Now, I say next week because you and I are recording next week.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know exactly if it's going to be next week or next 2 weeks. We're still figuring out the release schedule, folks. If you haven't picked it up, we've deliberately recorded about 4 or 5 episodes in advance so that we have a backlog. We're not reliant on trying to do this every week because life happens.
Exactly. And while Alex is relying on me for all of the tabletop knowledge, when it comes to the podcast world, that is very much his wheelhouse, where I am the newbie. So
It makes for a good team because that way Anko can sit here and chat about what he knows, and I can ask the questions and do the background stuff. It makes me feel useful to the show.
well, it wouldn't be happening without you. So.
You. All right. On that note, folks, hopefully we've given you something to think about. Hopefully you're getting something out of this. And I think it's next episode we're asking the question to see how observant people are. I think that was our plan. And if not, then you're really going to be wondering what we're talking about. So until that time, I forgot how I was going to end it.
Well, generally we've gone with game on.
Hey, thanks for watching Board Game today. We always appreciate your views and your support, but there are so many ways for you to support our site. Not only can you do right here on video, but you can go and check us out at boardgametoday.com, where we have more news, reviews, interviews, everything you could ever want. But since you're here, if you could, you can always give us a like, subscribe, or share our videos or watch something else. Is always much appreciated, and get your game on.